This is CheloniaCast 20. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to the Turtle Room for sponsoring this episode and the show. You can find us at theturtleroom.org/CheloniaCast, where you can learn more about our program and access the CheloniaCast Student Research Fund. Today we are joined by Scott Thomson again, as well as Dr. Camila Ferrara, who works for the Wildlife Conservation Society Brazil and is also a collaborator at SEQUA. We're really excited to, and Dr. Ferrara has done a lot of work with turtle vocalization and is well known for this. So we're really excited to talk to both of them today about all things Amazonian turtles and beyond. So thank you for joining us, both of you.
So to get started off here, we ask this question each time, but like, why turtles? How did you get interested in turtles specifically, and what about them? Makes them stand out as compared to other things, I guess.
I all my life I always interested in water, what we can find under the water. I really like water aquatic animals, and I started to work with aquatic mammals. But when I went for to start my masters, my supposed supervisor, because I never finished my first masters, she said to me, "Oh, let's work with turtles. It's much more easier to work with turtles on captivity than manatees that I was supposed to work." And then I started to work with turtles almost 20 years ago.
That's really cool. So what was your first kind of project when you went into kind of turtle work? What was the first thing you tackled there?
My first project with turtles, it was during my work experience when I was in the university. It was the first time when I came here because I'm come from São Paulo, more south of Brazil. And when I came here for my first time, I start to meet the turtle world, and I had the chance in that time to work with Podocnemus spansa and Uniphilis. I worked during the birth time with them, and then I start to fall in love for turtles.
Yeah, the Podocnemus are such a fascinating group of turtles. I think we'll talk a lot about that. That's a really interesting thing. Maybe
Yeah, sorry. I think it was a combination between Amazon and turtles.
right. There's certainly that's a good combination for sure. A beautiful region with some really fascinating just biodiversity in general, but then when it comes to Colonians, sort of a great group there. Maybe we could talk a little bit about SEQUA at first. I think a lot of the listeners are probably familiar, but maybe don't know exactly kind of the projects that are going on. And I even didn't realize that you had so many captive turtles and so many different species. But what kind of work are you doing, and what is the focus of SEQUA?
Sequa, it was a dream that started almost 12 years ago. We just, not me, but my ex-supervisor, Jikit Boget, he approved a big grant. And then we start to, him and all the students, we start together think about to build a place where we can just work with turtles, and a place where we can show for the population, general population, all turtle species and how they are important for Amazon, not just for the Amazon, but for the environment, why we have to care those turtles. And also in here in the Amazon state, not just in Amazon, but in Amazon in generally, people used to eat a lot of turtles. This is the most treat for turtles. And we understand if we have a place where we can show to the general public, maybe we can help to conserve turtles, give more awareness for people. Yes.
Yeah, awareness. Yes.
That, that's a good thing, especially I've read a lot through the Edward and Don Moll's book on river turtle conservation, and there's a good case study in there about the consumption of river turtles on the Orinoco and the Amazon River, and just the sheer numbers of turtles that were being consumed through in kind of the mid, I guess, 19th century was just sort of like millions. I mean, 48 million was an estimate. That's obviously not what's going on now, but it's good to kind of spread that educational and awareness and to do that kind of thing. That
Just for you have an idea, there's a recently paper from 2020 or 21, I don't remember exactly, that the authors, they show that just in the Amazon state, people consumption 1.7 million turtles per year. Just in the Manaus city, 102 turtles are killed per hour. Is killed, I think.
Killed.
Is killed per hour.
There you go. Yeah, that's an interesting way to analyze that. To look at the metric for hour. That is an interesting way to think about that.
It's a lot of animals per day.
It's pretty
Yes.
horrific amount of animals being
Yeah,
killed.
that's pretty. Yeah, that's pretty horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Some
hard
of
to
the-
comprehend those numbers. Yeah. Anything. I mean, there was never any kind of persecution of turtles in the United States that reached that level where you break it down to how many being killed per hour. I mean, even at the peak of harvest of, I don't know, you could use alligator snapping turtles or something. It was never anything near that. It was not even close. Like that's just mind-boggling to me.
And the ecologies of a lot of these the turtles in the Amazon and South America make it easier to exploit them too, I imagine, because you get the sort of mass nesting events. And the Podocnemus are particularly interesting. Those are the ones that were sort of, I guess, they're pretty well known. They're pretty charismatic and interesting. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the conservation status of the giant Amazon river turtle, as well as some of the other Podocnemus, and what sort of is the current state of that, and what kind of the past history of exploitation there.
I think the most treated species in the Amazon are Podocnemus spansa, the giant South American river turtle, and Podocnemus zoniphilis, yellow spotted river turtle. The other Podocnemus are in threat, but I think if we compare degree, in a lower degree, because Uniphilis and Spansa, it's easy to find in everywhere in the Amazon. Sex tuberculata, Podocnemus sex tuberculata, or Erythrocephala, they are more.
They have a much more restricted range.
Yeah, it's much more restricted range, and also Uniphilis and Spansa are bigger than the other two species. When you ask for a local people, most of locals prefer to eat Uniphilis and Sex tuberculata. But when you ask for the sellers, they prefer Spansa because it's bigger and you have more chance to get more money. Just for you have an idea, in Manaus City, you can buy a adult Expansa turtle for around maybe $300, something like that. One animal. It's a lot. Yeah, Expansa.
How large is the maximum size for a Uniphilis?
Normally, okay, the maximum is 109, but normally it's around 8 centimeters with the carapace.
80, yeah.
80, 85, something like that. It's a big female.
You're talking about Expansa?
Expansa, yeah. Uniphilis is smaller.
Yeah.
It's 40, 45 centimeters.
Okay.
And here there are a lot of conservation programs. The Brazilian Amazon is really good for, how can I explain this? Let me think. We have a lot of good projects. We have the government in Brazil support a lot the Amazon turtle conservation. This is a good point for us. Of course, we are never totally happy with the support. Always we want much more support from the government. But when we compare for the other countries in the Amazon, like Colombia, Bolivia, Venezuela, Brazil, it's have much more support than the other countries. We have a lot of conservation programs. And now we are working a lot with participative conservation from the communities, the local communities. We are working a lot with participative communication, participation, conservation. Conservation. Did it make sense?
Yeah, that's all right.
The community conservation, I think, is great, especially when you're working in areas like South America, where certain areas might not have access to the information that's going to spread as easily. So you want to get people involved with helping to. It really comes down to the local people, right? As an individual or a group of scientists, you can't go and enforce a lot of our sort of conservation-minded ideals. You really need everyone involved. That seems like a good thing. When it comes to the expanse, one of the things that's really interesting about them is that the mass nesting and the movements. I'm curious what is known really about how much they move to get to the nesting grounds from foraging grounds, and if there's a lot of data on that, or kind of what we know about that.
There isn't much publications about their movements from Spansa, but there are some studies that are not published yet, and we have some ideas that they can go very, very far. They can move more than 6,500 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. And a friend of mine that works in Pará state, he has some data that shows that the expansion they can go to the estuary,
The estuaries.
the estuary regions also.
So you're saying they go to they can go as far as they can in the river.
Sorry, I didn't listen to you.
They go all the way to the estuary at the end of the river, essentially. And is there a difference between the movements of males and females? Like, are only the females making those massive moving those massive distances?
I don't know. I think the males also move with the females. Probably there is difference, but probably they move all together. I don't know. This is what I'm thinking. Because when we are on the reproductive areas, we cannot just see the females. We can see also the males and the young ones. And probably they migrate together all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that's pretty interesting thing to see. Is there any way that have you looked at sort of the genetics and kind of the structuring of populations? Maybe there'd be a way to tell if you looked at.
Yep.
No,
We don't have the genetic studies.
it's very hard to do because you've got to, you'd have to transect over large, enormous regions of the Amazon, and a lot of it is extremely difficult to get to. And so there hasn't been the money put in to be able to do that yet. It's something that would require enormous resourcing of large boats to be going up and down the Amazon collecting turtles for long periods of time. It's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah,
Right.
what we are doing now to try to understand more about their movements, not me exactly, but there are some friends of mine, they are working with isotopes.
Isotopes.
Isotopes. They are working a lot with isotopes. Soon, probably, we will see some results about the isotope.
Yeah, isotopes,
Interesting.
because what they do is if you catch an animal in a particular spot and you do an isotope analysis, you'll be able to determine from isotopes where it was spent its time as a juvenile, for example. And if that's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers up the river from where you actually caught the animal, obviously they're migrating. So that's where isotopes can come in handy.
Right. You typically see that in kind of like feeding ecology, but that's an interesting way to use it. I know, like at the Savannah River Ecology Laboratory, they've used isotopes for, or at least looking at decay rates for movement of turtles, because in those little ponds on that facility, you could actually track, depending on how much of the isotope had decayed, or how kind of looking at different dynamics of that, you could tell where they were moving or how much they were moving. That's a pretty interesting thing to analyze like that. I think that so when it comes to like radio transmitters and tracking turtles, are there logistical challenges to that in the Amazon, or is that something that's frequently done?
It's not easy. To work with radio tracks here is very frustrating because the areas are so large and you can lose the animals so quickly. It's important, and I think it's much better when we work with satellite transmitters than VHF because we always lost the animals. It's the distance here is always a challenge for us.
Right, that makes sense. And so you've actually worked with some of these Podocnemus in situ. That's pretty interesting. Have you seen some of these Erybatas, the mass nesting, and what was that like to witness that? That's got to be really fascinating.
Yeah, actually, I'm working Rio Guaporé. Rio Guaporé is in the border between Brazil and Bolivia. And in this area, we have the biggest nesting area for expansion in the world. I guess last year we got around 80,000 females nesting in this area.
Wow.
It's 80,000, yeah. And in this area, we are working with drones to try to estimate the population size.
Okay, with drones. That's interesting. So is there some sort of like inbuilt algorithm on the drone that can count the turtles, or do you have to actually download the footage or what?
Yeah, I have some photo. It's not one photo because we have to do the transect, and then we have 1,500 photos and put together on an orthomosaic to get one photo. And we start to analyze the data, and I did this just early in the morning, at like 6 o'clock in the morning, with the night vision. We use it, but it's really hard to analyze the data because we cannot identify exactly how many turtles are together. You can identify the turtles with night vision, but you cannot identify how many turtles are together. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, is it possible? And we count one day 4,000 something turtles together.
Is
Just
it
6 o'clock probably is the third team to come in on the beach to nest.
okay? So this is before they're actually nesting. You're doing this in the water, or
No, we are doing this on the
Oh.
beach. 6 o'clock
Okay.
in the morning because they started to nest around midnight, 11 o'clock the night before. And they stay on the beach all the night nesting. And I start to use the drone around 6 o'clock in the morning because I need some light to see better the turtles. And when I start to use the drone, probably thousands of turtles nesting before, and thousands of turtles will start to nest. Understand what I say? It's something crazy.
There's a really cool picture of Camilla. She sent me, I think last season, and she's sitting on the beach amongst thousands of turtles.
It's the same sea turtle ahibada. When you think about the sea turtle ahibada, but it's with the freshwater turtle ahibada. I can send you a video later if you want to see. It's something amazing.
Yeah,
That's
we'd
awesome.
love to see that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I feel like for people interested in turtles, the Erybata is sort of the pinnacle of a natural event that you can see there.
I can say for you, it's a dream for all biologists to be in this area. For me, when
Right.
I arrived there, because the turtle behavior there also is completely different than the other areas where I worked, because there they are not shy, they are not feel in threat.
They're not afraid of humans.
Yeah, they are not afraid, never. The other areas where I worked before, yes, they always afraid. But in this area, no. It's something unbelievable.
I can't relate to that working with Western pond turtles out in California. I think that I have to work. I've got to walk 6 hours before I can find one sometimes. So that's got to be really cool.
Okay, but this is just happened with expansa. With all other species in the Amazon, we also spend hours and hours, especially the chilates. We spend hours to find one. It's not easy.
Oh, so this just happens with expansive. So the other Podocnemus don't have congregations like this, or that is.
No, not like this. We can see Uniphilis and Sex tuberculata, they don't have massive nesting, but in the past are some reports about Sex tuberculata. They could see like 100, 200 Sex tuberculata together on the beach nesting, but in nowadays, I don't think that this is more possible to see. But in their nesting area, yes, it's easy to see.
That's something I've thought about a bit, is because you've got at least 3 or 4 different Podocnemus that essentially are sympatric, maybe not, well, syntopic, maybe not 100% microsympatric, obviously not. Kind of what are the differences ecologically between the species that co-occur in the Amazon, like where they're nesting or their feeding ecology, those sorts of things?
Okay.
Do you want to show them one of each as you talk about each one?
Do you think? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we could do that. I like that.
I've got all 4 species ready to show you, so she might as well show them to you while she talks about it.
That sounds
Yeah.
good. Yeah, we don't
I like the
see.
sound of that.
I like this. Yeah.
It's
There we go.
Cephala.
Yeah, we
They
do not see
all
those frequently.
Podocnemis that we have in Brazil. And this species is we most of time just find in the black water. It's very restrictive. You can find a clear water, but most of time in black water, just a few places in a clear water. And the nesting area, this species is very restricted because they nest, I don't know to say the name in English, we say Campina and Campinarana in Portuguese. I don't have idea the name in English, the type of the habitat, but in this type of habitat, we have sand and also some bushes.
Oh, that's the, I honestly can't remember what I'd call that in English either, but it's basically
Yeah,
grassy old banks and stuff like that, so sort of grassland.
and this species is more specific than the other 3 species. Sex tuberculata, Uniphilis and Spansa. This is a Sex tuberculata. It's a young one. We cannot see the
Tubercles.
tubercle on the show red loss. Okay. But the Sex tuberculata, Uniphilis, and Spansa, those 3 species nest on the beach. Sex tuberculata and Spansa, they are more specific. They like sand beaches, and especially Spansa, they like sand beach, higher sand beach with large grains. But some areas this is not work. This is just a theory. Some beaches where I used to go to see a nesting area of expansa, they also use very sand with very small grains. So, and
Bless you.
thank you. And Uniphilis is this is Uniphilis. And I used to say that the Uniphilis are always happy because this species can be adapted very everywhere. It's very generalist. we can see nesting of them on the beach, normally on the beach, but we can see also on the clay soil,
Yeah, the clay soils,
on
yeah.
clay soils, and also in Matupá. Matupá is when we have a lot of grass floating on the river, but do you know how to say Matupá? Is when you have like a lot of plants together float on the
Oh,
river.
this is, the big clumps of grasses and aquatic plants that float at the top of the water and sit in clumps on the river, like small islands, but they would sink.
And they also nest in these areas. And this is expensive. Our little girl.
The little one, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
They
with the
get
hat-
if you get a big one out.
Yeah.
yeah, that could be
With
challenging.
with the Uniphilis, were you saying that they will nest on those floating islands of vegetation? Is that what you were saying? Oh,
It's
but
not
is there
so
any
common.
substrate there?
We can find some nests on this. But most of the time they use sorry.
Something-
Boy.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Oh, oh, well.
Is this
big
an
boy.
albino?
That's it.
Expensive.
Expensive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, hold that for a second. You're in just the right position. This makes for an awesome photo.
There we go. Jack's taking a photo midway through. Yeah, that's great. That's an albino or is it just like?
Yeah.
Wow, that's not wild caught.
Yeah,
so
that's-
someone donated that.
But
Yeah,
you
you
know,
can-
every year
that's-
in the nature we can find
Awesome.
albinos, 1, 2.
Yeah,
So you
albinos occur in the wild. They're just not very common.
Right,
They're
yeah.
more common in captivity because people, inbreed for it, and so it's to make it basically force it to occur. But
Is-
in nature, it still occurs rarely.
Right.
Is that one
Is
a
there?
or
What was that, Jack?
What sex is it? I was asking what sex is that specifically? Is that a male or?
It's a
It's a
male.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, look
big.
at that.
So when it comes to the
that's-
expansa, what is the conservation status in terms of like what? I guess maybe not conservation status. We sort of addressed that, but what are the current threats? Are there still? Is it still exploitation or is human habitation?
The main threat is the consumption of their meat and eggs.
Okay, so that's
We have other problems in Amazon. Of course, we have habitat loss, climate change, but the main problem is the uncontrolled consumption of the meat and eggs.
Okay, and do people still? I remember some of the accounts from the ecology of river turtles, people camping out on the beaches, and there was a whole sort of the military controlled this, and people had to pay. And then when the turtles started nesting, everyone ran out. And it was this mad dash. Is that still sort of what happens, or is this more controlled?
No, did you see these on some movies?
No.
Okay.
This was this was an account I recall from reading the ecology of river turtles, but this could have been I forget exactly when the citation was, but this may have been hundreds of years ago, kind of early on.
Because around the main beach nests for Docunemis, we always have a police with us. We need to have the police with us. Otherwise, people will come to the beach and catch all the eggs that they can. And also, if they have a luck, they will catch the turtle also. And normally, around all the main beach nestings, we have enforcement. A lot of guys with black clothes, arms, everything.
That's interesting. Has anyone done? It's interesting to think, right? That okay, the exploitation when you're taking the adult turtles and then all the eggs. That's clearly
No,
not
the
sustainable.
eggs also. The eggs also.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everything. So you're not leaving anything
Also the
behind.
hatchlings. The hatchlings, we have a problem with hatchlings also.
Yeah, everything, right? So everything's getting poached. There's no sustainability in there. Has anyone done like life table analysis to look at kind of the most vulnerable life stage? Like are the hatchlings more important than adults, or the adults more important? I feel like adults, you would think, right? That it takes so long to get to a mature reproductive female. She's going to be contributing so much to the turnover of the population that would be the
Yeah,
most important,
males
right?
are the gold of the population. Because if you have problems with the hatchlings for a few years, the female population will still there, and we can still continue to reproduce them. But if we lost the females, like 2015, I guess, yes, 2015, we had a problem, um, and the river is not come down in the normal time. And when the females start to arrive on the nesting areas, they couldn't find the beaches because the rivers not come down. And then they start to move, looking for places to nest. And they start to come up a river, and then depression for the turtles because they start to arrive close to small cities, and the pressure for them start to be higher, and the people start to kill a lot of turtles. In one night, people catch 80 females. 80, it's a lot when you think in a population around 1,500 females. In one night, they catch it.
Right. And this is sort of, there are certain areas where the hunting pressure is higher than others, right? So there's certain
Yeah,
areas that are
and the problem is, if this is happen every year, if they kill 100 females every year for this population, in 20 years we'll finish.
right.
We don't have okay, maybe in the 20 years we can have a recruitment from the first females, but will be not enough.
The
Right.
rate of loss is greater than the rate of growth. So it's not
Yeah.
sustainable.
Normally, when we work on turtle conservation in the ex situ, we are more, for us, it's more important to care the big females, the adult females, than the hatchlings. Because if we lost the hatchlings, it's okay, 1 year. We have other years. And
Right.
we always put more power for the enforcement during the nesting time than the birth time. Of course, we have enforcement around during the enforcement time, the birth time, but during the nesting is when we have power.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. And then I guess we can sort of maybe transition to talking a bit about vocalization, but so that makes sense. So I guess changing focus a little bit, you've done a lot of work with looking at how turtles communicate. This has been fascinating stuff. I think I first saw this on the BBC, the news, and then I immediately started digging into all the literature on it, and it was pretty much all just things that you've been authored on. So that's pretty interesting. What first led you to think that turtles could be communicating, and what led you kind of to look into the sound, and how are they doing this?
Why I started to work? This is what
Sorry?
he asked me why I started to work.
Yeah, why did you think that the turtles were communicating? What led you to that?
Everything happened at the same time. When I did my master with sexual selection, with Podocynemis erythrocephala, and always when I observed the animals, I saw some movements and always think, why they don't use the sound to communicate? Always we start to think about that, especially for the males, and sometimes during the reproductive behavior, the females and male just look at themselves and change the movement, the behavior, and then we think, wow, something happened. Maybe they are use the sound to communicate. Okay. And then when I almost finished my master's, someone, Jacqueline Giles from Australia, the first person that described the sound communication in turtles. She just finished her PhD. And then we said, yes, turtles use sound to communicate, probably. And then Dick Vogt, my supervisor, he said to me, let's try to develop a project for your PhD about that. I said, yes, why not? Let's try. And then we started.
That's
And we choose Podocnemis spansa because it's one of the most social species in the world. And we say, if you see some animals should speak, probably spansa will. And then we should spansa.
right. What kind of things did you find? Like, how do you analyze this? You used a hydrophone, I think, and
Yeah.
like logistically, how do you do that? How do you go out in the field and test whether they're communicating? I mean, it seems like that's
At
kind
the
of
beginning,
complex.
yeah, my PhD, everything, it was a new discover every day. It was so cool, this period. At the beginning, I went to the breeders, turtle breeders, because they have a large tanks with a lot of turtles, and I put hydrophones there and spend time. But in the breeders, I never listened so well. Maybe because they are on the tanks for a long time. And then I catch other turtles and put in a swimming pool in my house, and then I start to record it again. And at this time, I really find the sound. I say, okay, now I understand with sound, what's the type of sound they use. And then I went to the nature in situ during the nesting time because there are a lot of turtles together and say, let's start to record. Okay, this is on the first year. On the second year, we start to think, okay, but how about the hatchlings? Why not hatchlings? And then I start to record the hatchlings. On my third year, we asked it when they started to use sound. Let's try to record the eggs. The beginning, when I started to record the eggs, I was felt so stupid because I just look in the eggs and I put my microphone and but in the end, yes, the turtle start to make some noise and say, yeah, they they start to use the sound in the embryos form.
And
And
so
then
how complex are the sounds that they're making? Are there different sounds for different behaviors, or what is the kind of
uh, product name is sponsor specifically, they use 11 sounds to communicate. Uh, the hatchlings, they use 7 types of sounds, and the adults, 8 types of sounds. But there are some specific sounds for hatchlings and some specific for adults. And between the hatchlings, there are some specific sounds that they just use inside the nest, and other sounds that they just use outside the nest, under the water. And the same thing for the females. Uh, they have a specific sound that they just use when they are outside of the water, like basking, and other sounds just under the water. And
that?
also the intensity of the sound between females and the hatchlings is different also. Normally, the hatchling sounds is lower than, no, it's opposite, it's higher than the adult sounds.
What frequency range are we talking about? Are these low frequencies, or they're pretty low, right?
It's not, it's, we can hear the frequencies between 36 hertz to 4,500.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't know much about the human, but humans can't really hear that without it in the system.
And between 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz.
That's for the human band.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So we actually could pick up on that. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I didn't really consider that. So that's an interesting thing to think. Do you think that taking turtles, I guess, what does this say about their social complexity, right? If they're using these sounds, and they're pretty complex animals socially, not what you'd normally think for turtles, right? That's pretty interesting.
I think most of turtle species use sound to communicate, but the way how to use the sound is different between species. Like more social species maybe use more sound than the, I don't know if I can say less social. I'm not feel
Solitary.
comfortable. Yeah, more solitary turtles, they use less sound to communicate. But what we are seeing that every turtle that we are trying to record, we find sound.
I remember, yeah, there seemed to be sort of a wave of. It
We
seems like there's kind of a wave of different discoveries in this. What species has it been documented in besides the Podocnemus?
okay for the Podocnemus, all for from no, not just from Brazil and Colombia. They recorded all Podocnemus use sound. We submitted a paper 2 weeks ago, and we show that all turtle families use sound to communicate.
Okay, wow. So this is very current. So
We
was
couldn't
this
say about all the species, but families, yes, all families use sound.
okay? Yeah, wow. So yeah, sea turtles. I get, and
Yeah.
so
Sea turtles.
do you think that moving turtles into captivity is something that messes up their is sociality if it's just for nesting? I mean, maybe it wouldn't mess anything up if you have captive turtles, but maybe it is, right? Is it causing an issue for them in captivity, being separated from others?
Maybe, yeah. I don't know.
Probably early days in looking into this to say that on turtles, but in other animals which are social. If you don't get your social construction correct in, say, a zoo situation, you will have a lot of problems. And that's been shown in mammals, in other types of reptiles, in birds. You have to have the right sex ratios, the right numbers for the animals to thrive. And so it's probably true of turtles as well.
And with my experience, when we put turtles together for a short time, you have more chance to get sounds than if you have a turtle in the captivity for a long time. You have much less chance to get the sounds.
Okay, so they stop. Huh, that's an interesting observation, right? That it kind of deteriorates over time. Does it deteriorate or does it just stop? Is it something that like it
They just
slowly
stop it. And I think probably they just stop it. They don't need to use the sounds maybe in the captivity like they use in the nature.
right. With humans, I mean, it's like if we're in isolation for too long, that can lead to mental kind of health issues, but I don't know. With turtles, maybe that's not something that's there. I think that's a very complex kind of neurobiology question is how do you correlate? Maybe there's a correlation between lifespan or hormonal levels and being disconnected from social from congeners. Maybe. I mean, that's maybe it's not really beneficial and that kind of hasn't evolved that kind of kin drive for compassion for kinship in turtles. Maybe it's nothing beyond just nesting propensity, if that makes sense. Yeah, okay, that's pretty interesting. I think that's something really sort of like as I doing a PhD, that thesis you said that's got to be good. A lot of people I think struggle for a question, but that's certainly not something that
Yeah, I'm
is
very
bad.
happy to see that there is so many people start to stir the turtle communication. Not just freshwater, but also sea turtles. There is very interesting studies with sea turtles also about sound
Okay,
communication. Very interesting in the nature. So
that's
cool.
good to know. That's good. That's good. So one of the other things that you did some work with the Phrynops, the Jeffrey Sidnecks in the Guapore River. I probably butchered the pronunciation, but that was pretty interesting. I've come across a paper on that for basking. I've done some work with basking ecology of Western pond turtles, and I came across that paper or something related to that region with the Phrynops. But what kind of stuff did you learn there? What was it like to work in the field with those?
What I want to do in the film?
With Phoenix Jephronis. Did
Me?
you do anything on Jephronis?
No. No.
No, I don't think Camilla worked on Jephronis. She might have. There is actually a Gabriel Ferreira as well. You
Yeah,
might
we
have got him.
published maybe something in the past, but something very. I'm not working much with this species. Most of time I work just with Podocnemis because my main focus actually is to work with conservation for WCS, and most of
Okay,
time.
Yeah, I could be thinking of the wrong Ferrer. I'm pulling that from somewhere deep in my mind.
That's fine.
Yeah, no, okay. That's so that okay. Podoc nemus is sort of the. What is it like, kind of doing in the field, right? That's something that we're all from the United States, and we have got certainly an interesting ecology and communities here, but I've never, as someone who's never been to the Amazon, there's got to be some really cool things that you come across. What was maybe your most interesting encounter with a turtle, and what kind of other animals are you coming across when you're doing your work?
It's difficult to answer because there are so many interesting places and cool areas. Depends what you want to see and what you want to live here. Because each river, each nesting area that you go here is completely different than the others. It's for me, it's very interesting to go to Rio Negro, in the Blackwater, and work with Podocnemis uniphilis, Sex tuberculata, and Erythrocephala. And also the work with the communities there is so cool to work with them and understand how the relationship between the local people with the turtles. I like so much. And also it's very interesting to go to big rivers like Abufari or Guaporé and see big big nesting areas to go. Yeah, depends what you want. Everything is so interesting and cool.
Yeah,
And
that's
I think for the Americans, the most different things is the size of the rivers, the challenge to be here. Everything is so huge to access to my areas is everything is so far, even for me that I'm here. Just for you have an idea, for me to go to Guapora River, I spend almost 2 days to be there in the area. I need to catch airplane, bus, car, and boat. And yeah, it's the same. If I want to go to Abufari, I can go by airplane in 2 hours and then take more 2 hours by boat, small boat, or I can go by big boat in 2 days. The distance here is always huge.
The scale of the Amazon is just something you can't appreciate till you see it. It's there's no other rivers virtually in the world that have the scale of this river.
And also to estimate population here is really, really hard. When we work with mark and hack capture, it's a big challenge for us always because we have so many animals in a large areas and yes.
right. You're saying the Podoc nemus will move up to 650 kilometers. It's hard to have a closed population model for that, I imagine. It's very tough to kind of estimate. Right, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that exists sort of on population size estimates, or like how do you tackle that? Is that even something that's doable?
I try it, but I never did something really good. But a friend of mine, he worked for his PhD with Podocnemis erythrocephala, and he's spending 4 or 5 years in the field, and he could catch around I don't know 5,000 animals, something like that, and he could do he he got an idea the size of the population in the area, but
Right, you've got to define the area, I guess.
he capture animals here is really really hard. In Abufari, catch around 800 turtles, and I recapture just one.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
not
that challenging. Yeah.
challenging and very expensive because we spend a lot of petrol.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that, yeah, that's interesting. The population estimates. I've tried to do this with some. I'm looking at doing this with the pond turtles in California, and also doing it for some Florida spring systems. The turtles that we have. There's one site here where we've got 11 species in this one system, and it's a lot easier to do that. Still, for the cooters and the cooters in there, they'll move up to 100+ kilometers in and out of this one river. But that makes it kind of challenging if you're trying to do these estimates. But for other species, it's easier. I can't imagine trying to do a whole something like as extensive as the Amazon, trying to kind of get a grip on that. That's when people ask, "Oh, how many turtles exist of this species?" Right? It's really, you just kind of laugh, right? It's not really something.
Dealing with a river system that has a quantity of water the size of large countries.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That
Can you
logistically is challenging.
calculate when we saw 8,000 females on the beach? Can you imagine how many hatchlings we got? It's around 100 per nest. And can you imagine this? We have a mass birth also. It's impossible to count everybody. And
Right. When it comes to the Podocnemus, are there any sort of like osteological differences between the species, or I guess 6 species?
for you.
That
This one's for me.
This is for him.
okay.
There are, and actually they're very distinctive, especially Erythrocephala is quite distinctive. They have differences in the regions of the nasal bones and regions of the palate, because this is all diet related. Of course, any bones related to the mouth is usually heading back to diet, and so there's slight dietary differences and things like that. They're basically all herbivores, but they eat slightly different plants, so their mouths are differently constructed, and their shells are obviously different. I mean, Uniphalus is the shell is much more domed, whereas Expanse is much more flattened and flared, and the other two are much smaller animals. So yeah, there's significant differences between them.
Okay, that's good to know. So there's another project that I've heard a bit about. It's the Rhinomes. That's upcoming research, but that's kind of an interesting turtle that we don't hear a lot about in the U.S. I don't know really about anything going on with them here, but you're doing some stuff with them there in Brazil. So maybe you could tell us a bit what is known about them, what's known about their ecology, and what sort of things are we still trying to learn?
That's a project that Camilla and I are doing together with another person as well, and we're looking at several things, and I'll talk about one facet of it, and then Camilla can expand on another. One thing I want to do with Hanemes is I'm not convinced it's a single species for myself, and my problem with it is that once you get about, I think it's 400 kilometers west of Manaus, you run out of confirmed locality data for that species. But then it picks up again just before you get to Colombia. And you'll see plenty of confirmation data in Colombia for the species. So this is a huge section of the Rio Negro that has no confirmed sightings of the species. But if you look on the map, in anywhere that shows how they're distributed, they've got the whole Rio Negro as being the distribution, and it's one big population. And that doesn't seem to be correct. And so we're looking at 3 localities to determine if there is a difference. And one is Trombetas, what's it called? Where Fabio is. Trombetas, Juki, and then Colombia, and comparing the 3. And I think Trombetas and Juki, which is near Manaus, will be probably a maybe fragmented but large single population. But the one in Colombia, I think, will possibly be a completely new animal. And they're not connected. I don't think they're in the Rio Negro between mostly here and Colombia, to put it simply. And the species is not a river turtle, which is really important to understand with that turtle. It lives in tiny, in Australia we call them creeks, but they're water holes you can almost jump across, and little streams. They're a stream turtle. And so the river has nothing to do with their distribution. So if they're along the Rio Negro, they'll be in all these little tributaries of the Rio Negro to the side of it. They won't be in the river itself. It's not the type of turtle it is. And they differ from what I can see so far in some of their skull morphology. The coloration on the head is different. I'm not a big fan of color as a character in any turtle virtually. I think one of the problems with color is that to use color as a character, you've got to demonstrate that it has an evolutionary significance. And in turtles, it doesn't. So turtles are highly variable in color within species. Whereas if you look at birds, songbirds, for example, females are picking the male that they like the most. So the males all try to be like that. And so you've got this evolutionary driver pushing the males to look out like a certain color. And that just doesn't happen. I did show this animal yesterday, but this is Anemone's.
Wow.
Get her in the middle without dripping on the laptop.
No.
So, they're very red, as you can see. And when they're younger, they're extraordinarily pretty turtle. This is pretty much an adult. She's dripping a lot. Grab her back before she drips on the computer. She's peeing everywhere. Anyway,
there you go.
typical turtle. Anyway, so yeah, I'm looking from my perspective of it. I'm looking at a lot of their. Is it a single species? And that's very important to know because it impacts conservation. It impacts many other facets of what you do with this turtle and how you manage this turtle. And Camilla, you're familiar with most of the work that's been done on the ecology that was done by.
You can explain. Your
Oh, all
English
right.
is much better than me.
Apparently, my English is much better. Okay.
You can explain much better than me.
There's been a few projects on anemones in the past, very few, but honestly, there's about 8 papers and 2 theses, which is the some knowledge of this species. So we have a fair idea what it eats. We have some idea of what it, how it lives. We don't know where it nests. We know when they nest, but we don't know where they nest. Their eggs have never been found. They're mostly eating things like palm nuts and stuff like that in the forest. So they're sort of like a semi-forest turtle. A American equivalent would be a bit like terrapin, where you're seeing a turtle that is an aquatic turtle, but it gets out of the water a lot and moves around and eats on land as well. They've even been found to have lizards and things like that in their stomach contents. So their diet is not great. It's not well known. Very interesting one on the reproductive ecology of them is that here in around the Manaus area, and this is their type locality, they breed around May, June period, whereas in Colombia, they're breeding in August, September. So you've got reproductive isolation. Now, that may not be genetic. It could also be to do with environmental conditions. So the turtle could be working with the dry season or something like that, which is different over in Colombia to here or something like that. So it may not have a significance to it being a species, but it's certainly a pointer that they're very different.
Right. Even if the I guess the patterns of the weather there is different, that could still mean they're on a separate trajectory, right? Because that's going to lead, if you've got differential reproduction, that over time might lead to different kind of selective forces working on the incubating animals in a way that kind of creates two separate lineages over time, right?
It's two separate lineages. As best as I can tell, they are allopatric by a long way. We're talking some 1,000 kilometers separation. And they have probably been that way for quite some time. I think my own, just theorizing about it, I think they're a leftover from when before the Amazon even existed. Honestly, I think they're a leftover from the major drainage of the Orinoco, which was there until the Brazilian and Guyana shields went up, and that split the Orinoco into what is still the Orinoco and the Amazon. And so I think they're a leftover from that. There's no way they traveled up the river. The river is a vicariance event to them. It's a major vicariance event. So I think they're remnant populations of a very old species, and their neural bone formation and some of the features of their carapace and plastron are very primitive for chelids. They're actually quite an ancient turtle.
That's some interesting work. Something that you don't hear a lot about. That species in particular, doesn't get covered very often. Kind of falls in that, the Mesoclemys, that sort of, I guess, grouping of turtles. It's not, in terms of like where it's kind of lumped when we're talking about them. Not maybe relationship wise, you could expand upon that.
Phylogenetically, they seem to be related most closely somewhere around the Acanthocheles Mesoclemys group, but they're certainly nowhere inside them, either of them. They're a long way out, but and that's supported by both molecular and morphological analyses. So they're very, very distinctive lineage.
That's very interesting. One other species I was just thinking of that has similar coloration, obviously a very different thing, is the Hogue's side neck. The I think it was Ranicephala, maybe that's still considered, but that I don't know what is known about those, but that's kind of a different thing. I was just kind of thinking about that.
We're writing a paper about Ranicephala right now. It was in Mesoclemys for a long time. It should never have been. It's not anything like Mesoclemys. It's actually more similar to Phrynops than it is to Mesoclemys. And so they're a species that is highly endangered here, extremely endangered. But they're a monotypic genus. They're basically an extremely primitive lineage that led to eventually the Phrynops. So they've been around a long time by the look of it. They're only found in the Atlantic forest area, isn't it? Yeah, the Atlantic forest area, which is a highly endangered habitat here in Brazil. They're similar to Phrynops in a number of skull features, but they are different in the shell. The one character that can identify any Phrynops from any other chelid is the number of neural bones. All Phrynops have 6 neurals, and they have the first 6, neurals 1 through 6. No other chelid has that pattern. And so that identifies all Phrynops. Hoggy does not have that pattern, but it has 1 or 2 neurals, and they're usually the 3rd and 4th neural, which may or may not be present. And but it has a Phrynops-like skull in a number of ways, but it's a very, very different animal. Not a lot known about it, honestly. It hasn't been studied well enough. It's a very poorly studied species.
Yeah, I seem to recall the Renemes in the TSG account on them. It said they might be more common than you think, but that's not the case with the Hoagie. That they are actually confirmed to be rare, or just there's not enough to know.
I don't know. You familiar
with Hogan
Hoggy?
studies?
Yeah.
I don't think that they are doing much huggy studies. There are few theses in Brazil about huggy. They have a large huggy conservation project in Carambola, Minas Gerais. But also, yeah, there are few people studying them in Rio de Janeiro. Also, there's a guy, I think he's doing his PhD with huggy. But that's it. Not much people are working with huggy.
That's interesting. A lot of cool things to be learned, I think.
Yeah,
Well,
there are space for people come to Brazil and start to work with turtles and study. Not many people are studying turtles, especially in the south of Brazil. Most of people are in north of Brazil. In south, we just have a few studies, very very few. Not just with hoge, but with the other species, the same history.
right.
Yeah,
That
there's a lot of species in southern Brazil. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not as much as the Amazon,
yeah,
but
but
they are still some significant species down there, like Hydromedusa. Um,
Hillary,
there's Hillary and also
Vanderheij,
yeah, Van der Hage. The new we're going to resurrect one of the Phrynops in the paper we're doing.
tuberosos
That's the
also.
Heoparana Phrynops. So there's a lot down there. It's not the 16 odd species we got here, but there's still some very significant species down there and very unusual ones like Hydromedusa especially.
yeah. You see, some of the acanthochelys too. There's some interesting stuff there. Yeah, that's yeah. There's a lot of cool stuff. Well, I guess we're kind of coming to we can wrap things up. We'd like to keep it to around an hour and 30
Well,
minutes.
I had
if
one
we
more.
can,
I
but
kind of had a question I wanted to get in here
go
with.
ahead.
Um, in terms, kind of circling back to the Amazon, about the Peltocephalus, like where do they fit with the rest of the like turtles in the trophic pyramid? Not
How
like
could we forget?
nephropods, just, I mean, like in terms of their ecology, what is their diet, and when do they nest, and like sort of those kind of things.
Their behavior it's not so much different than the other podocynemes. They used to nest when the water start to come down, but the difference for the podocynemes that the peltocephalus they nest in the ai meu Deus, floresta alagada. But they nest in a floated forest
Oh, the flood forest.
under
Yeah.
the leaves, and this is good because it's like they protected their nest because it's really hard to find the peltocephalus nest, and this is good for their conservation because most of time people just leave their nest. They don't need the peltocephalus eggs or hatchlings. Most of time they just eat the youngs and the adults. But for another side, you can find because to catch podocynemes is more easy if you catch it's easier when you catch them during the dry season, but Petrocephalus you are able to catch during all the seasons, even when the river are full.
Yeah, during the flooded forest. Yeah,
During
when
the
it's fully.
forest, is it possible to catch Peltocephalus? But people don't like much to eat Peltocephalus like the other podocynemes. And when you see people selling Peltocephalus, it's just in the very small cities or inside the communities. In the big cities like Manaus, it's it's not common. It's very uncommon you see the Peltocephalus here. And yeah, something more to say.
Yeah, there's not a huge amount of studies on.
There are few
There's
studies,
some,
yeah.
but not a lot.
Not a lot. There are few studies. There's a new study that they published a month ago from Juarez Pesucci. He talking about the size estimate for Peltocephalus. I don't know if you saw this paper. It's a new paper, but the data is a little bit old. It's an old data, but it's a new paper.
We have a bunch of them here, but they're a little harder to catch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the story of the kneecap getting bit off too.
Yeah, I
is
was about to
probably
bring that up. Is that Is there any validity to that?
A kneecap being bit off by a peltocephalus. I don't know of it, but I'm sure they'd be quite capable.
I got one. Like
Oh, you got bitten by peltocephalus?
Yep.
That must have made
in
you
the
cry.
past.
I would not. I would not like to get bitten by one. It really looks like they could do some
Yeah.
damage.
It was. They did.
How do they compare, like from an evolutionary perspective, how closely related are they to like Erimnacheles or the Madagascan bighead? Because I mean, they appear very similar, but
I think a lot of their similarities are
like
dry it off a little bit. Yeah. Some of the similarities are really. Yeah, there's peltocephalus.
There you go, little one.
It's a little one. We have some huge ones, but
Yeah,
they're in the
very
big
little
pond.
one. We have some.
But they're hard to grab.
wow.
Same with the expansive. We have very big ones of those too, but we just grab little ones because they're easier to handle.
All in one.
A lot of the similarities between peltocephalus and Erimnacheles would seem to be convergence because they're using have that similar way. They're actually quite distantly related. They're not closely related at all. Because if you take in the fossil record, podoctamids are actually very difficult because the Podocnemidae has 600 species when you include the fossils. And it has, only 6, 7, 8 species living. So when you include the fossils, it's quite complicated, and the South American and Madagascan forms are not closely related at all.
Not close to it.
Interesting.
Interesting.
I'd seen
That makes more sense.
There was a paper that looked at the diversification of the Podocnemidae, or just Pan-Pelamedusoides, I guess, and they hypothesized multiple different dispersals of ancestors from Africa to South America and then South America back to Africa. I don't know. That was based off of, I can't recall. I think Fritz was one of the authors on that paper. I don't know if you could expand upon that, but that may have just been ancestral, like the stem group that they were talking about in terms of exchange.
Yeah, a lot of some of that is done with molecular work, which is very complicated because it doesn't really work very well with fossils. And I mean, there's a number of paleontologists who have published on the different branching of the various fossil Pelamedusoides. The Podocnemidae were found from a fossil point of view in Madagascar, Northern Africa, South America, and when you look at it that way, they basically spread right across. And remember that the northeastern chunk of South America is technically part of Africa from a tectonic plate point of view. So basically I don't want to use the term rafting because rafting is usually referring to animals jumping on logs and floating across the sea. But they continentally rafted between Africa and South America. And then they went extinct in Africa, except on Madagascar. And so that's how they are sort of related.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And as the continents were slowly drifting away, there could have been actually some oceanic dispersal, but then as they got farther, the likelihood of that happening got lower and lower.
Well, oceanic dispersal with freshwater turtles is not that common because they can't handle salt environments as a general rule. There are exceptions to that, Trionychids, for example, but most of the fully freshwater turtles do not have high salt tolerance, and the thing that you need to be able to travel through a marine environment is salt tolerance because it will kill you very quickly. Tortoises can do it because they are are evolved for desert conditions, and that happens to also make you salt tolerant, just by the way it works. It makes them have an impervious layer on the skin so they don't lose water. And so if you're up in salt water, you still don't lose water from osmosis. So that's why tortoises can do it, but most other freshwater turtles can't.
Yes, that's a good point. All right. Well, we can start to kind of wrap things up. I think that's a good thing to end on there. Just thinking about kind of how these families of turtles have kind of come to be and evolve over time is interesting. We do like to do a little trivia round at the end here, just for some fun. Just a few obscure, just a way to bring in really obscure facts and talk about stuff that never really gets brought up, I guess. So I don't know.
She doesn't know any trivia questions. I did
All
send her a
right.
message.
I saw the message, but you wanna answer?
What's the most unusual fact about turtles that you can ask someone and they probably won't know it?
One question is good. We're up to the test.
I gave them 3 yesterday. So.
You gave me.
No, I gave them 3 yesterday.
I don't know.
What's something they will not know? Pester.
There's so many things.
It's hard. It's
That's
hard.
actually the hard part. There are so many things that you pick up over, a 20, 30, 40-year career about turtles that it's actually extremely difficult just to think of one thing.
No, there are so many questions. How turtle can produce the sounds? We don't know.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know,
There
and
may
we
be
don't
one
know.
that they won't know.
Probably. We don't know. We need to know.
All right. How many groups of turtles have been found so far in Antarctica?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not.
Ooh.
Well, I guess you have to define groups first. What do you mean by groups?
Families.
Okay, families of extant turtles or also
No.
extinct.
Well, no, extinct.
Anything?
They're all extinct, obviously. They're all extinct, obviously.
Oh, geez, yeah. Okay, so from a paleontologist perspective, this is going to be interesting. I mean, there's 2 that make sense, but then I'm thinking like extinct families of turtles.
Like these families,
I think
no extant species still in like Australia or something. You're talking exclusively Antarctic families.
Well, actually, just only found where the fossil has been found in Antarctica. There's only been 2, and they're actually
melanids, maybe.
families, and they're both extant families. And one is leatherback. They found a fossil of a leatherback in Antarctica. That's been described. The other one is probably a chelid.
Chelids, right? Yeah. Okay,
Wow.
yeah,
So
that makes sense.
Wow. What was the age of that Dermachelys fossil, or Dermachelidae, I guess?
I think it's around. I'm doing this from memory, and if Jim Palm sees this, he'll kill me if I get it wrong. I think it's around 50 million years.
Okay, so not anything recent.
No, I mean, Antarctica basically froze when there became enough of a gap between Australia and Antarctica to allow the Roaring Forties to develop. So a full circumnavigation of air around the planet with no land masses in the way. That's when Antarctica froze, because you ended up with this effectively permanent cyclone around the whole continent. And that dropped the temperatures there, and that's why it's frozen. Until then, it was actually a little warmer than it is now. There's fossils of dinosaurs, there's fossils of plants from Antarctica.
There's never been melanids found there. I mean, they would have been there, right? But just we haven't found them. Is that?
Yeah, no, there's nothing there found of melanids. I would imagine they may have been there because there's no melanids found in Africa. So there's only really 2 ways to get between South America and Australia. So if you've got a family that occurs in South America and Australia, there's only really 2 ways of doing it. They either go through Africa or they go through Antarctica.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, I think that this is a good place maybe to wrap up. But thanks again this is Scott's second in 2 days. So thanks again for coming on. And Dr. Ferrara, thank you for joining us today. I think this has been really interesting. I think I've learned a lot. I can't speak. I think Jack, Jason.
Yeah, I've learned a lot this episode and had a good time. Appreciate you guys for coming on again, and we'll see you tomorrow, Scott.
Yeah, tomorrow's with Lucas, and he'll talk about matters. Yeah.
And thanks for the invitation, guys.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. And for all the listeners, you can find us at theturtleroom.org/CheloniaCast. It's up on the screen now. And we will see you on the next episode recording.